This study is presented to the Dja Dja Wurrung and Jara people, the traditional owners of this region. La Trobe University and the Mount Barker research team acknowledge that the Dja Dja Wurrung and Jara people are the traditional owners of the place on which these stone arrangements stand. As custodians of the land, they have looked after country since the Dreaming. This is a living culture that makes a unique contribution to the life of this region. We respect their elders, past and present. We thank the Dja Dja Wurrung Clans Aboriginal Corporation, the registered Aboriginal party for this region, for granting the cultural heritage permit that made this study possible. The stone arrangements of Mount Barker are enigmatic. Clearly, they were human-made. But by what people? Aboriginal people or Europeans? A lot of work went into their construction. There are two main arrangements. This one is around 300 metres. And this one around 100 metres. There are at least 5 other smaller ones. Why did they make them? What did they mean? If they are of great significance to the heritage of the Jara and Dja Dja Wurrung people, and to the wider Australian community, how should we preserve and manage the site? The Mount Barker Stone Arrangements Research Project was designed to answer these questions. I'm Jerry Gill. I was Chief Researcher and Project Manager. The Senior Aboriginal Cultural Advisor was Jara Elder Uncle Brian Nelson, who provided ongoing cultural oversight and site management. There was a large field team: surveyors, archaeologists, filmmakers, photographer, GIS and mapping experts. On our first day of detailed surveying and photographing, Brian determinedly made his way up the steep slope to the top of Mount Barker. Well, Brian, it must be good to see the stone arrangements again.
It is, because it was my people who made them. It's good to know that they're still there, not damaged to billy-o. It's good we've found the precious stones that's here, and they've been built for a reason. And we need to look after them.
Yep, that's why we're here, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. The characteristic language of the stone arrangements is that the humanly arranged stones link naturally occurring rocks. These create long, sinuous lines which snake their way up, or is it down, the slopes. An accurate map of the stones was made by taking differentiated GPS plots every few metres and then photographing these spots, which are then keyed to the GPS readings. This data was then entered onto high-resolution, very precise aerial photo maps. This allows us to get detailed maps of each section and broad overviews of the whole precinct. So what did we learn from the Mount Barker research project? There are a number of main points. Perhaps the most important of them is that we have a high level of confidence that the stone arrangements up on Mount Barker were built by Aboriginal people. There are a number of reasons we're confident of this because of the context around. There are some scar trees within metres of the site on both Mount Barker and the North Spur. They don't fit European functions, such as fences or boundary markers. There are European stone fences, but they are straight and sit right on surveyed boundaries. The Aboriginal stones are curving, sinuous shapes. It looks very much as though Europeans destroyed rather than created the arrangements. I'm standing in front of a house built by a man called Joseph Young. He had been a bullock driver and camped here on his way from Melbourne to the goldfields of Bendigo. He liked the place so much that he asked the government to survey the block, and he bought it from them and had 7 children in this house and grew potatoes for the goldfields. In building the place, he found these convenient piles of stones. And if we look closely behind me at those walls, you can see that they are exactly the sorts of stones that you'd see leaning against each other in the stone arrangements. Behind me is an Aboriginal oven. The reason we call it an oven is it was a place where people came and cooked their kangaroos and emus and possums and the yams that were the staple of their diet. The blackness of the soil is because of the carbon from the fires, and the other thing that tells us it's an oven are these heat stones. The granite rock that's characteristic of this country makes very bad heat stones because it explodes in the fire. But these are pieces of sandstone that have been carried from the site and used in the ovens. This is a very big oven. It's about 6 metres across to that rock, about 7 or 8 metres wide, and that means that it was used by a lot of people. These are very, very close to the sites on Mount Barker behind me and across at the other stone arrangements on the North Spur. Why were the arrangements made? What did they mean to the Aboriginal people who built them? My historical research strongly suggests that the stones represented the Mindi, a gigantic snake who was sent by Bunjil, the wedge-tailed eagle creator being, to punish people for breaking the laws he had set down. The Mindi was seen as bringing the dreadful smallpox epidemics which killed between 40 and 60% of the population. Sometimes smallpox killed whole clans. Ceremonies were conducted to show reverence to and placate the Mindi. I've come here to the Daylesford Historical Society Museum to read you something that'll give insight into the Mindi and Mindi rituals. My work as an ethno-historian was directed towards understanding those enigmatic stones and what they might mean. It's an enterprise in which I'll fail in a certain sense, in that the full richness of the meaning of those stones was only known to the people who built them and engaged in rituals around them. The best that can be done is to give you a sense of the sort of thing that the Mindi might have meant, the sort of rituals that might have been conducted around it. Here, in the volume of the Daylesford Advocate of 1883, is an article which will tell you a lot about this. While we'll never know what happened in those rituals that occurred at Mount Barker, we do have an absolutely wonderful description of a Mindy ritual which took place at Franklin Ford in 1843. The witness was a young man in 1843, and when he wrote this piece, 40 years later in 1883, he was looking back. He calls himself the Old Identity. He describes arriving at the corroboree ground and seeing hundreds of people milling around prior to the ceremony. There is the effigy of a bark serpent, about 20 metres long, in the middle, and a big fire, and there are people painted up, each individually and intricately painted, done up with cockatoo feathers and parrot feathers in their hair, their faces painted with ochre. And there is one ritual, a dance that he describes in detail, but then comes to what he calls the main show. Coming into the light, the performers had an entirely new step, which chiefly consisted in stamping, as if to discover how far they could put their feet through the earth. They kept excellent time. On nearing the serpent this time, for they the first time appeared to have been unaware of it, pretended to be awfully frightened of it, running backwards and forwards, but growing bolder each time until at last they touched it, when an unearthly scream from the whole lot burst upon the midnight air. Then followed such feats of agility and somersaults backwards and forwards as I seldom or never saw equalled. This continued for some time, until at last one more daring than the rest got astride the serpent, and another one put his hand on its mouth, and then every one in the crowd ventured to touch it. Just as the moon appeared on the eastern horizon, she shed a glow of bright light on the serpent, when all at once you could see the dark form of a savage coming out from underneath. At this sudden apparition, the whole lot bounded away, but before they'd got 5 yards, a loud noise was heard like the shot of a gun, and you could see a shoot of clear red fire leaping upwards in heavy coils from the serpent. An immense fountain of sparks was hurled up, which filled the air with spangles that floated gently away upon the smoke, and in a short time the whole of the serpent was consumed. We shall never again see such a sight that I and a few others still alive witnessed in 1843 at Franklin Ford. The scale and splendour of this ritual, its choreographed nature, gives us an insight into the emotional, intellectual and cultural investment in the Mindy and the associated rituals. Like the bark effigy of the Mindy at the centre of the Franklin Ford ceremony, the stone arrangements at Mount Barker form the shapes of huge snakes. The largest of the arrangements snakes its way up the hill and culminates at the head section. It emerges from the alcove, gently curving, and terminates at these naturally occurring stones that look like the head of a snake. Mount Barker Unit 1 similarly curves around the contour and terminates at this extraordinary rock that also looks like a snake's head. The large arrangement on the North Spur follows this same snake-shaped pattern. The same large assembly of clans and individuals who were involved in that ritual at Franklin Ford were here around Mount Barker and Mount Alexander in January and February 1840. The conclusion I draw from this project is that the Mount Barker and North Spur area is a sacred precinct associated with the Mindy and its ceremonies, and as such it's a place of the highest order of significance for the traditional owners, the Dja Dja Wurrung and Jara peoples. and indeed for the whole of the Australian community.